Imagine an entire fleet of ships, fully manned, provisioned, and prepared. Imagine the creak of their timbers against the tide, the quiet murmur of sailors making ready for voyage, the smell of salt and tar thick in the air. And now imagine that in one single night without warning, that fleet is gone. Not wrecked on rocks, not burning in some forgotten battle, not captured by enemies, but vanished, as if pulled into the sea itself. This is the story whispered across centuries, the story of the Templar fleet, a fleet that slipped away under the moonlight and was never seen in full again. It is a story that rests at the edge of silence, half history, half mystery, and yet wholly compelling to every soul who has ever stood before the sea and wondered what it hides. The year was 1307. The Knights Templar, once the most powerful military and financial order in Christendom, had grown both feared and envied. They held castles, commanderies, treasuries, and, most dangerously of all, ships. Their fleet at La Rochelle was more than wood and sail. It was the pulse of their movement, a network of vessels that carried not only men but secrets, treasures, and knowledge between continents. When King Philip IV of France moved against the Templars, seizing their lands and arresting their brothers, it was this fleet that mattered most. But when his agents arrived, when soldiers stormed the ports and combed the waters, the ships were not there. The docks were empty, the ledgers silent, and the sea gave no answer. This is why their disappearance lingers like smoke in the imagination. It is not merely the absence of ships. It is the absence of evidence, the silence that is too sharp, too deliberate, to be mistaken for accident. Great fleets do not dissolve into thin air. Great fleets leave wrecks, leave ruins, leave bones and broken masts washed ashore. But this fleet, the fleet of the Templars, left only questions. It is those questions that echo across the centuries, pulling scholars, dreamers, and seekers into a labyrinth of possibility. Was it destruction or was it design? Was it panic or was it plan? Pause with me now and let us breathe into that silence. Let us close our eyes and hear the faint rhythm of waves against unseen hulls. For in that silence lies the power of the mystery. Some tales endure because they are retold, but some tales endure because they are never fully explained. The Templar fleet belongs to the second kind. It rests at the meeting point of fact and legend. It sails forever caught in the wind of speculation. And when we lean closer to its shadow, we are not only asking about ships, we are asking about the very nature of secrecy, of survival, and of transformation. Why does this matter? Why should the loss of ships 7 centuries ago still stir the heart today? Because fleets are more than wood and rope. They are the embodiment of intent. They are choices made in timber and canvas, choices about where to go, what to carry, what to protect. When the Templar fleet vanished, it was not only a logistical disappearance, but a philosophical one. It forces us to ask, what was so precious, so vital, that it demanded a vanishing act? Was it treasure? Was it sacred relics? Was it knowledge too dangerous for kings or popes to possess? Or was it something deeper, something intangible, a way of ensuring continuity in a world that had turned hostile? So we stand at the threshold of this journey together. Before us lies the vast expanse of theory, of legend, of fragmentary evidence scattered like shells across the shoreline of history. We will walk from France to Scotland, from Portugal to Venice, from monasteries on the edge of the Atlantic to whispered sightings across the fog of centuries. Each chapter will bring a possibility, each possibility a reflection of the enduring enigma. For at the heart of it all lies one question, clear and quiet, like a bell tolling in mist. What really happened to the Templar fleet? And perhaps, as we listen to the echoes of the past, we will come to understand that the answer is not only about ships, but about silence itself. About how silence can be the strongest fortress, how disappearance can be a form of preservation, and how the sea keeps secrets not by hiding them, but by never letting them settle. The fleet may have gone, but its mystery has never sunk. It drifts still across the tide of centuries, inviting us not to solve it but to follow it, as one follows the line of a horizon that forever recedes. So let us begin gently, patiently, with open ears and steady breath. Let us step into the rhythm of waves and words, into the hush of history's longest night. And as we move, remember this is not only about vanished ships, but about us, about the questions we carry and the stories we choose to keep alive. The Templar fleet is gone, but its echo remains, waiting for us to listen. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the medieval world not as a frozen tapestry of castles and kings, but as a living, breathing network of roads, rivers, and seas. Picture merchants crossing dusty routes with caravans of silk and spices. Picture pilgrims trudging toward Jerusalem with little more than faith and fear. And amid this restless tide of humanity, imagine a force of knights unlike any other. Not only warriors sworn to defend, but bankers sworn to calculate, and landowners sworn to maintain. These were the Knights Templar, a brotherhood that rose from humble beginnings on the roads of the Holy Land and became one of the most powerful institutions of their age. They wore white mantles marked with a red cross. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but their influence reached beyond monastery walls. Within a century of their founding, the Templars held estates across Europe, vineyards in France, farms in England, mills along the Rhine, and fortresses carved into the hills of the Levant. A knight might pray in Paris in the morning, send a letter to Cyprus by evening, and know that the order's network would deliver it safely. They were warriors, yes, but they were also administrators, managers of wealth and land, stewards of an empire of both sword and coin. Their coffers grew with donations from kings and commoners alike. Noble families anxious to secure heavenly favor left them gold, cattle, even entire villages. Monarchs deposited funds into their care, trusting the discipline of the order above the greed of local treasurers. And so, bit by bit, the Templars became something remarkable. They became the first international bankers. They invented systems of credit that allowed a pilgrim to deposit money in London and withdraw it in Acre without ever carrying a coin through bandit country. They issued notes and tallies, recorded debts and repayments, and moved currency across borders with a precision unmatched in their time. But their genius lay not only in numbers and land, it lay in their command of the sea. From ports like Marseille and La Rochelle, from island fortresses like Cyprus and Rhodes, their ships carried not only knights and weapons, but the lifeblood of medieval commerce. They transported pilgrims across treacherous waters, they ferried supplies to crusader strongholds, and they moved the wealth of Europe discreetly, efficiently, under sails marked with the cross. The Templar fleet was not the largest in Christendom, but it was among the most organized. It was a merchant fleet in one moment, a convoy of war in another, and always it was a moving vault. Consider the significance of this naval strength. A king might command armies, but armies marched slowly. A pope might command bishops, but bishops could not move treasure over stormy seas. The Templars alone could shift gold, grain, relics, and men from one corner of the continent to another with the speed of wind on water, and that ability made them indispensable. When Crusader garrisons in the east were starving, it was Templar ships that brought wheat and wine from the west. When royal envoys needed to cross into hostile waters, it was Templar escorts that carried them. And when nobles needed loans secured against estates, it was often Templar vessels that carried the collateral across the waves. The fleet was, in truth, more than a military arm. It was leverage. It gave the order independence from local rulers who might threaten their lands but could never fully contain their ships. It gave them the ability to withdraw, to retreat, to regroup, even to vanish if the winds demanded it. And above all, it gave them secrecy. For what is more elusive than a fleet sailing at night? Its cargo hidden in sealed chests, its sailors sworn to silence under pain of death. In an age when letters could be intercepted and caravans raided, the Templar fleet was a guarantee that what needed to arrive would arrive. And this, perhaps, was the seed of envy that grew in the hearts of kings like Philip IV. The Templars had become too necessary, too wealthy, too independent. They were a state within states, a network of land, coin, and sea that no monarch could fully control. Their wealth rivaled kingdoms, their credit underpinned economies, and their ships could elude the grasp of even the most determined ruler. To those who watched from their thrones, the white-cloaked knights no longer looked like humble servants of God. They looked like rivals, like creditors, like men who could not be bent by decree or papal bull. And yet, for all their power, the Templars remained bound by their vows. They did not hoard wealth for individual luxury, but for the survival of the order. Their riches were collective, their lands managed for the whole, their ships commanded in the name of duty rather than personal gain. This paradox, that men sworn to poverty held the wealth of nations, only deepened their aura of mystery. It made them seem both untouchable and inscrutable, both holy and dangerous. So when we speak of the Templar fleet, we must see it not only as a collection of hulls and sails, but as the visible tip of a hidden iceberg. Beneath those ships lay a web of finance, land, loyalty, and secrecy. The fleet mattered not simply because it could fight, but because it could move the invisible arteries of power, gold, information, influence, across oceans unseen. To control the fleet was to control a shadow empire, and to lose sight of it, as history did in 1307, was to lose sight of one of the greatest mysteries of the medieval age. Thus, as we step further into this story, let us carry this truth with us. The Templars were not merely warriors in armor. They were landowners, bankers, builders, and above all, navigators. Navigators of seas, of economies, of politics, and perhaps even of destiny itself. Their fleet was not just wood and rope, but the lifeline of their power. And when it vanished, it was not simply ships that disappeared. It was the very balance of power in medieval Europe that shifted. That is why this mystery endures, why we still turn our gaze to the sea and ask, softly, steadily, where did the fleet go? The story of the Templars cannot be told without pausing at the throne of King Philip IV of France. Known as Philip the Fair, his appearance was noble, his demeanor regal, yet behind the marble face of a monarch lay a man suffocated by debts. Wars had drained his treasury, costly campaigns against England and Flanders had bled him of coin, and his taste for splendor demanded more gold than his kingdom could yield. When he turned for loans, it was often the Templars who provided them, drawing from coffers built on centuries of donations and careful management. Each note of credit, each tally mark in their ledgers, bound Philip tighter to them. And as the years passed, resentment and desperation grew in his heart, until the crown he wore felt lighter than the burden of what he owed. Debt breeds anger, and anger seeks justification. To Philip, the Templars were not just creditors, but rivals, men in white mantles who could command wealth that outstripped royal revenue. Their fortresses stood like miniature states within his realm, immune to his taxes, bound not to him, but to the Pope. Their fleet was beyond his grasp, their wealth beyond his reach, and their independence beyond his control. To a king who craved dominion, the Templars represented not service, but threat. And so he began to whisper accusations, shaping shadows into weapons, until the Templars became monsters in the eyes of those who needed a reason to hate them. The charges came suddenly, but the planning had been meticulous. Blasphemy, heresy, obscene initiations, worship of strange idols, denials of Christ, all accusations forged in secret councils, sharpened like daggers for the moment of attack. On the night of October 12th, 1307, Philip sent sealed orders across France. Bailiffs and soldiers were instructed not to open them until dawn. When the sun rose on October 13th, the orders were read aloud, and the hunt began. Across the kingdom, at monasteries, at fortresses, at commanderies hidden in forests or built along rivers, the Templars were seized in a single coordinated strike. That day would echo forever as Friday the 13th, a date that to this day carries the whisper of dread. Thousands of brothers were dragged from their halls, shackled and imprisoned. Their lands were confiscated, their treasuries seized, their leaders paraded before jeering crowds. And under the iron grip of inquisitors, the confessions flowed. Torture twisted bodies and bent words. Men were stretched on racks, burned with irons, drowned in water, broken until they would say anything, everything, even the impossible, just to make the pain stop. And so the myth of Templar heresy was born, not from fact, but from fire and rope. Yet amid this storm of violence, there was one silence Philip could not break. When his soldiers turned their eyes to the sea, when they searched the harbours of La Rochelle, they found nothing. The great fleet, the pride of the Templars, the vessels that carried their wealth and whispers, had vanished like mist at dawn. No ships lay at anchor, no sails stood in the harbour, no cargo waited on the wharves. For all the precision of Philip's plan, For all the cruelty of his arrests, the sea had given no prize. It was as if the Templars had known, as if they had prepared, as if the fleet had slipped away under starlight long before the king's hand struck. The absence of those ships turned the king's triumph into a riddle. He had their leaders, he had their castles, he had their lands and their ledgers, but he did not have their fleet. Without the fleet, he could not be sure he had their treasure. Without the fleet, he could not claim total victory. It was the missing piece of his plan, the silence in the middle of the orchestra, the ghost note that would haunt every account of his triumph. For what use is conquest if the heart of your enemy still beats beyond your reach? As the years passed, Philip's grip on the order tightened. Grand Master Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake in 1314, defiant to the last, cursing both king and pope with his dying breath. The lands of the Templars were transferred to the Hospitallers, though much was skimmed by local lords and monarchs along the way. The order was dissolved, its name dragged through the mud of accusation and fear. And yet, even as flames consumed their leaders, even as ink condemned their memory, the story of the vanished fleet remained untamed. The image lingers still. Imagine the night before October 13th. Imagine the creak of ropes and the splash of oars as vessels left La Rochelle. Imagine cloaked figures carrying crates aboard, crates sealed in wax, crates marked with symbols no one could decipher. Imagine the sails rising against the moon, the red crosses glowing faintly in the starlight as the ships turned not toward the shore, but toward the horizon. Imagine silence, and then absence, and then the endless whisper of waves where once a fleet had lain. This is the paradox of 1307. The Templars fell, and yet they escaped. They were burned, and yet they endured. Their order was dissolved, and yet their fleet lived on, somewhere beyond the reach of kings and popes alike. And so, every telling of their fall must pause here in this silence of the sea, and acknowledge that though Philip won his war, he did not erase the mystery. He only deepened it. For the fleet remains, not in wood or rope, but in the imagination of all who wonder what secrets it carried and where it may have gone. And so the guiding question sharpens. What was it that Philip feared enough to destroy, but not powerful enough to capture? What was it that vanished into the horizon that autumn night, leaving behind a king who thought himself victorious, but left the world instead with a riddle? The Templars may have fallen, but their fleet, their silence, and their legend sailed beyond his grasp, and that, perhaps, is why the story has never ended. When King Philip struck against the Templars, he struck with the certainty of a man who believed treasure awaited him in their vaults. For years he had looked at the order not only as creditors, but as keepers of vast hidden riches. To him, the Templar commanderies were not chapels of prayer, but strong boxes of gold, silver, and jewels. Yet when his soldiers pried open the chests, when they stormed the treasuries, when they combed through monasteries and castles, they found little more than routine accounts and ordinary tithes. The great wealth he expected had vanished. The fabled coffers that once made monarchs tremble appeared to have been drained dry. And this absence, more than anything, ignited the enduring question: where did the treasure go? Theories sprouted almost as quickly as the arrests themselves. Some chroniclers whispered of hurried evacuations in the weeks before October 1307, carts drawn by oxen rolling at midnight along country roads, their cargo shrouded under black cloths, their escorts disguised as funeral processions. The illusion of mourning was enough to pass unchallenged, while beneath the draped coverings lay not bodies, but sealed chests filled with coin, relics, and documents too dangerous to leave behind. The image is haunting, the solemn toll of bells masking the quiet exodus of the order's wealth into hidden hands. Others pointed to the coasts, La Rochelle above all, where the Templar fleet was based. If treasure was removed from inland treasuries, where better to send it than to the waiting hulls of their ships? Witnesses later recalled strange activity in the harbours, barrels rolled aboard under moonlight, crates sealed in wax and lifted by pulleys into cavernous holds. No manifests recorded, no customs checked, only the silence of loyal sailors sworn by vows stronger than fear. By the time Philip's men arrived, the docks were bare, the ships gone, and the treasure beyond reach. But was it gold alone that vanished? Some believe what Philip sought was never merely coin, The Templars were bankers, yes, but they were also guardians of relics, scrolls, and secrets. Over generations, kings, nobles, and pilgrims entrusted them not only with wealth, but with items of spiritual or political value, documents of legitimacy, relics of saints, maps of contested lands. What if the treasure that disappeared was paper rather than metal, knowledge rather than jewels? Knowledge can be carried in silence, in memory, in crates that look ordinary but conceal truths too explosive to fall into royal hands. Theories multiply like echoes across stone. Some claim the treasure was divided deliberately, dispersed into different directions to avoid capture. A portion to Scotland, carried north by ships seeking refuge beyond English reach. A portion to Portugal, where sympathetic kings would shelter the order under new names and new robes. And perhaps a portion even further, westward across waters barely mapped, into exile or rebirth beyond the horizon. If true, the treasure was not lost, only transformed, becoming seed for legends that would later grow in places like Oak Island, in whispered rumours of hidden vaults, or in the silent foundations of the Portuguese Order of Christ. And yet, for every theory, a counterpoint remains. Some argue there was never such treasure at all, that the Templar wealth was exaggerated, that it existed not as gold in vaults, but as lands and rents, spread across Europe and impossible to conceal in a single chest or fleet. They suggest that Philip's disappointment was real, that he expected overflowing coffers and found instead only scattered accounts because the treasure had always been an illusion. But if this is true, why then the secrecy? Why then the silence of witnesses, the curious disappearances, the night caravans spoken of in hushed tones? Absence too neat becomes its own kind of evidence. Let us imagine the scene together. Gently, slowly. A stone vault in Paris, doors swung open by soldiers, torches flickering on shelves lined not with gold, but with empty spaces, with dust, with nothing that could fill a king's purse. The silence in that moment must have been heavy, like the hush after a storm when nothing has changed except expectation itself. Imagine Philip's fury, his humiliation, realizing that what he craved had slipped through his fingers like water through sand. And then imagine the parallel scene. A line of carts rolling through forest paths under cover of night, the creak of wooden wheels muffled by cloth, the glint of stars on sealed iron bindings, the knowledge that somewhere ahead ships awaited at the coast. 2 moments in time, bound together by absence and by movement. The treasure question is the question of purpose. If the Templars did spirit away their wealth, it was not done lightly, not done in haste, but with the calm preparation of men who understood what was at stake. Perhaps it was to preserve the survival of the order, ensuring funds for exile and continuation. Perhaps it was to shield relics or knowledge from destruction. Or perhaps it was something even deeper, a belief that their mission was not ending, but transforming, and that their wealth needed to be safeguarded for a journey yet to come. So we stand at this turning point with only silence to guide us. Gold that cannot be found, chests that may or may not exist, ships that sailed into the mist. The mystery of the treasure is not simply about riches, but about intention. For in every legend of vanished wealth, there lies a hidden question. What was considered too valuable to lose? What was it that made men risk their lives, their vows, their very order to protect? And as we lean into that silence, we begin to see the outlines of the larger mystery. It was not only the Templars who vanished, it was their wealth, their secrets, their legacy, carried away in chests on carts or in the hulls of ships that slipped beyond the reach of kings. The treasure may never be unearthed in shining coins or jeweled reliquaries, but in the persistence of the story, in the echo of the question that will not die, we glimpse the real treasure. A mystery that endures, a silence that survives, a riddle that invites us still to ask, where did it go and why? Imagine the harbour of La Rochelle in the autumn of 1307, the salt wind blowing inland, gulls circling lazily, and the steady rhythm of waves brushing the stone docks. By day, it looked as it always had, a bustling port where merchants bartered, fishermen unloaded their catch, and sails dotted the horizon like scattered parchment on blue water. But if you listened closely, If you watched the quiet corners of the night, you might have seen something different. You might have noticed wagons arriving under cover of darkness, men in white mantles moving without words, crates and barrels lifted with unusual haste into waiting hulls. There was no shouting, no fanfare, no clamour of departure. Only silence, precision, and the soft sound of ships being readied for sea. The records tell us something curious. Port manifests from La Rochelle are incomplete, pages missing, entries ending abruptly where they should have continued. Some note cargoes received under seal without explanation. Others mark vessels cleared for departure, but list no destination, no crew, no master's name. And then the trail vanishes. It is as though a portion of the harbour's life was deliberately erased, the ink thinned into nothingness, leaving behind only silence and suspicion. What kind of fleet leaves no trace, no witness bold enough to swear where it had gone? Perhaps only a fleet belonging to an order trained in secrecy, whose very survival depended on vanishing when threatened. Eyewitness fragments hint at provisioning. One chronicle speaks of barrels of salted fish and dried meat being loaded weeks before Philip's arrests. Another mentions the purchase of new ropes, pitch for sealing seams, and fresh sails delivered to the Templar storehouses. These are not signs of panic. These are signs of preparation, of a voyage intended, organized, and supplied. And when the king's men stormed the port on that fateful October morning, they found no ships waiting, no warehouses full of goods, no crews lingering for orders. The fleet had slipped its moorings, perhaps days earlier, perhaps weeks, and sailed into a horizon that would swallow it whole. The idea of an organized retreat rather than a desperate flight reshapes the entire story. If the fleet's disappearance was planned, then the Templars were not victims reacting to disaster. They were architects steering their fate. They must have known the storm was coming, must have received word of Philip's plots, must have chosen the sea as their refuge before the king's hand could close around them. And so the absence of ships is not a gap in history but a deliberate silence, a silence crafted by men who knew how to vanish without leaving ripples. Imagine again those ships at anchor under moonlight, their sails furled, their decks quiet, their crews moving with measured calm. Crates sealed with wax lowered into holds, chests carried on shoulders, the hiss of ropes as anchors were drawn in. A lantern flickers once, twice, a signal from shore, and the fleet begins to move, one vessel after another, sliding into the darkness beyond the bay. No trumpet announces their leaving, no bells toll farewell. Only the wind takes notice, carrying them out past the watchtowers, past the reefs, past the sight of any man who might betray them. By the time dawn arrived, the sea was empty, the harbour bare, and the treasure, whatever it was, gone with the tide. Accounts of vanished vessels extend beyond La Rochelle. A ledger from a coastal parish mentions ships unaccounted for, seen at dusk, absent by dawn. A merchant letter complains of delays in shipments because the brothers' ships have taken the best crews and the finest timber. Even a papal record, though vague, admits uncertainty over the fate of the vessels of the temple, formerly many, now none. The silence is too consistent, too widespread to be coincidence. It points not to a scattering in fear, but to a movement with intent. A decision made at the highest levels of the order to remove their fleet from danger before danger arrived. Some historians argue this was merely luck, that storms, delays, or coincidence kept the ships away from La Rochelle on the day of the arrests, but such chance would be extraordinary, almost miraculous. Far more convincing is the idea that the Templars orchestrated the disappearance, using their network of commanderies, messengers, and allies to send warning ahead of Philip's strike. Their system of secrecy, honed across centuries of warfare and pilgrimage, allowed them to act with discipline where others would have faltered. They did not scatter, they withdrew, intact, into mystery. And what of their destination? Some suggest the fleet sailed north to Scotland, where sympathetic lords and the rugged coast offered shelter from papal decrees. Others believe they turned south to Portugal, where a crown less hostile and a coastline rich in harbours could welcome them into rebirth under another name. Still others whisper of westward voyages, daring leaps beyond the known world, guided by charts and stars inherited from Eastern scholars. Wherever they went, the ships carried not only men, but the story of an order refusing to end on its enemies' terms. To this day, the harbour of La Rochelle holds its silence. Tourists walk its quays, unaware of the night centuries ago when sails vanished into the mist. The stones remember, but they do not speak. And perhaps that is the final truth. The fleet slipping away was not chaos, not accident, but mastery. The mastery of men who understood that sometimes survival is not in standing firm, but in flowing with the tide, in leaving behind nothing but questions, in transforming absence into the strongest presence of all. Thus we arrive at the heart of the matter. The Templar fleet did not flee, it departed. It did not dissolve, it transformed. Its leaving was not the end of the story, but the beginning of legend. And as long as the sea keeps its secrets, as long as silence endures stronger than words, the fleet will remain not lost, but waiting, a ghostly procession of sails drifting forever, just beyond the horizon. When the Templar fleet slipped away from La Rochelle, it did not dissolve into nothingness. Ships do not simply vanish, they travel, they arrive somewhere, even if history cannot agree on the destination. And so, across centuries, theories of dispersal have grown like branches from the trunk of silence, each pointing to a different shore, each suggesting that the fleet's disappearance was not an ending but a scattering, a seeding of legend across seas and continents. Three paths emerge most often in the whispers of chroniclers and seekers alike: Scotland, Portugal, and most daring of all, the distant Americas. First, Scotland. At the time of the arrests in 1307, Scotland was a land locked in struggle, fighting desperately to preserve independence against English domination. Robert the Bruce, excommunicated by the Pope, stood in open defiance of papal authority, and his kingdom was in many ways beyond the grasp of Rome. What better place for hunted knights to find refuge? Whispers tell of Templar ships anchoring near the Isle of Mull, a remote and rugged outpost where caves, coves, and loyal allies could conceal men and cargo alike. Local records from the region speak of strange vessels, southern accents, and even stone tablets inscribed in coded Latin appearing in church ledgers shortly after the Templars' fall. Some historians dismiss these as folklore, yet the coincidences linger like footprints half buried in sand. Could it be that part of the fleet offered its swords to Scotland, fighting later at Bannockburn, where the Scottish won a miraculous victory over English forces? Some claim phantom horsemen in white mantles turned the tide that day, striking terror into the enemy before vanishing again. Myth, perhaps, but myth often flowers where memory has roots. Then we turn to Portugal. Unlike France, unlike England, unlike most of Catholic Europe, Portugal refused to destroy the Templars entirely. King Dinis, pragmatic and shrewd, recognized their value. He did not burn them, he did not scatter them into exile. Instead, he simply renamed them. Out of papal condemnation rose the Order of Christ, a new brotherhood curiously identical in membership, structure, and assets to the old. The ships that had once borne the red cross of the Templars now carried the more rounded cross of Christ, and their voyages continued under royal blessing. This transformation did more than preserve the order, it planted the seeds of something far larger. For within a century, under the patronage of Prince Henry the Navigator, the Order of Christ funded voyages that pushed the boundaries of the known world. West African coasts, Atlantic islands, and eventually the sea roads that led across the globe, all carried forward with knowledge, ships, and discipline that many believe were inherited directly from the vanished Templar fleet. Consider the symbolism here. In France, the order was destroyed. In Scotland, it became legend, but in Portugal, it became future. The fleet may not have ended at La Rochelle, it may have merely changed its banners, preserving its legacy by disguising itself in new colours. And the uncanny navigational prowess of early Portuguese explorers, so often ahead of their contemporaries, feeds speculation that they were drawing on hidden charts, hidden traditions, perhaps even hidden memories carried forward by men who once sailed under the Templar cross. Portugal did not simply shelter the Templars, it transformed them into a force that would eventually open the Atlantic to Europe. And then comes the most daring possibility of all, the Americas. Long before Columbus, Legends stir of pale-skinned men arriving in Nova Scotia, of crosses carved into stone on remote islands, of hidden vaults beneath the earth that no one has yet uncovered. The most famous of these tales centers on Oak Island, where for centuries seekers have dug in search of a treasure said to lie beneath a labyrinth of traps and tunnels. Some insist this is mere coincidence, a story inflated by greed and imagination. Yet others whisper that the engineering of such a pit, the complexity of its design, could only have been conceived by men with both wealth to hide and knowledge to preserve, men like the Templars. Oral traditions of the Mi'kmaq people speak of strangers arriving by sea, not as conquerors, but as guests. And on stones, weathered by centuries, faint carvings resembling the flared Templar cross have been noted, though never definitively proven. The idea of a Templar voyage to the Americas is tantalizing, and skeptics scoff with reason. The ocean was vast, the technology limited, the risks monumental. And yet, we know the Norse reached Newfoundland centuries earlier, their settlement at Lonceau Meadows, undeniable proof of transatlantic contact before Columbus. If Norse longships could cross, could sturdy Templar vessels not also endure the same winds and currents? Especially if they carried maps or knowledge inherited from Moorish scholars in Iberia, knowledge of stars and currents that gave them confidence where others feared. The possibility cannot be erased, and so the story endures, a fleet sailing west not to vanish, but to preserve, to hide, perhaps even to found a refuge where papal decrees could never reach. Each theory of dispersal carries its own weight, its own allure. Scotland offers secrecy, resistance, and legend. Portugal offers transformation, survival, and rebirth into an age of discovery. The Americas offer daring, distance, and the thrill of a secret colony beyond the edge of maps. Perhaps the truth is not one, but many. Perhaps the fleet divided, sending ships to different horizons, ensuring that if one group failed, another might survive. Such a plan would suit the Templars' discipline, their secrecy, their understanding that survival sometimes depends on scattering like seeds into the wind. And so we are left with a riddle not of absence but of abundance. Too many theories, too many possibilities, too many echoes across time. Yet in each one we find the same thread. The Templars did not vanish without purpose. They moved, they transformed, they seeded their legacy across seas and centuries. And whether in the caves of Mull, the castles of Portugal, or the mystery pits of Nova Scotia, their echo lingers still, urging us to lean closer, to listen deeper, to imagine sails in the night carrying not only men, but secrets meant to outlast the reach of kings. When we speak of treasure, the mind drifts instinctively toward gold coins stacked in glittering towers, toward jewels shimmering in candlelight, toward reliquaries encrusted with silver and pearls. This is the image Philip IV chased, the dream that drove him to strike against the Templars. Yet what if the true treasure of the order was not gold, not jewels, not anything that could be locked inside a chest? What if their most precious possession was knowledge, scrolls, maps, texts, secrets too powerful to be left vulnerable to the whims of kings and popes? The Templars were not merely soldiers, they were custodians of information. Their time in the Holy Land exposed them to the wisdom of cultures far older than their own. In the markets of Jerusalem, in the libraries of Antioch, in the scholarly circles of Moorish Spain, they encountered mathematics, astronomy, navigation, medicine, knowledge centuries ahead of Europe's cloistered world. They may have gathered manuscripts from Arab scholars, translations of ancient Greek works, perhaps even remnants of Egyptian or Babylonian lore. To men devoted to discipline and preservation, such knowledge was as precious as gold, for knowledge was power, and power, unlike coin, could not be melted down or spent into nothingness. Some whisper that the Templars carried sacred scrolls from beneath the Temple Mount itself, the very place where Solomon's temple once stood. Their earliest quarters in Jerusalem were built above those ruins, and legends insist they dug beneath the stones, uncovering vaults untouched for centuries. What they found there, if they found anything at all, remains cloaked in mystery. Some claim it was the Ark of the Covenant, some say genealogical records that threatened dynastic legitimacy, Others imagined texts that contradicted church dogma, perhaps even early Christian writings suppressed by Rome. If such artifacts or documents existed, they would indeed explain the urgency with which the Templars spirited away their treasure before Philip's grasp. Knowledge can be dangerous. A chest of gold makes a king greedy, but a scroll that questions the foundations of his authority makes him afraid. Imagine if the Templars possessed writings that undermined papal supremacy, secrets of Christ's lineage, or alternative doctrines preserved from early Christianity. Imagine if they held maps of distant lands unknown to Europe, charts that hinted at a wider world waiting across the seas. Such knowledge would threaten not only Philip's purse, but the Church's control over truth itself. And in an age where power was inseparable from dogma, to lose control of truth was to risk everything. Thus, the treasure question deepens. Perhaps the carts that rolled under midnight skies did not carry gold, but manuscripts bound in leather. Perhaps the crates sealed in wax held not relics of glittering metal, but star charts, compasses, and scrolls inked in languages now forgotten. Perhaps the fleet that left La Rochelle carried not coins, but ideas, ideas shielded from fire, hidden from torture, and preserved for those deemed worthy to inherit them. Consider, too, the strange references in later centuries. Marginal notes in Portuguese texts, repeating phrases once found in Breton letters. Symbols carved into churches in Portugal and Scotland that echo designs from the East. Frescoes painted over with careful plaster, hiding crosses and stars beneath their devotional surfaces. These are not signs of wealth hoarded. They are signs of memory preserved, of secrets veiled in symbols that only the initiated might understand. If the Templars passed down treasure, it may have been hidden not in vaults of stone, but in codes of word and image, in traditions cloaked as ritual, in the architecture of silence itself. And so we must return to the guiding question: what is treasure? If it is that which has value, that which men risk lives to protect, that which kings will kill to possess, then perhaps the Templar treasure was never meant to shine in torchlight. Perhaps it was meant to guide, to whisper, to empower across generations. For gold can be stolen, but knowledge once learned cannot be erased. Knowledge passes like a current from mind to mind, invisible but unstoppable, enduring far longer than coins stamped with the faces of forgotten kings. It is no coincidence that the Order of Christ in Portugal became the patron of exploration. Their ships seemed to sail with uncanny foresight, their navigators guided by more than guesswork. Could this have been the flowering of hidden charts preserved by the Templars? Knowledge passed quietly into the hands of those who would use it not to hoard, but to discover. The age of discovery may have been lit not only by ambition, but by the spark of knowledge carried forward from the shadows of the temple. There is a quiet irony in this idea. Philip IV sought to destroy the Templars, to erase his debts and seize their wealth. Yet in doing so, he may have only amplified their legend, ensuring that the treasure he failed to find became immortal in memory. He captured their bodies, but perhaps their minds, their knowledge, their secrets slipped through his fingers, carried away on ships he could not catch, hidden in words he could not read, preserved in rituals he could not break. And so, when we ponder the vanished fleet, we must look beyond gold and silver, beyond coins and jewels. We must imagine scrolls wrapped in oilcloth, maps inked with coastlines that should not exist, relics not of metal but of meaning, truths too volatile to be displayed openly. This is the treasure beyond gold. This is what may have driven the secrecy, the silence, the discipline of their flight. And this is why the question still lingers, not because we hunger for wealth, but because we sense that something deeper, more dangerous, more enduring, was carried into the night by those ships with the red cross on their sails. The treasure, then, is not lost. It is hidden in plain sight, in myths, in symbols, in unexplained fragments of history. It survives not because it is buried, but because it was always meant to be more than material. It was meant to be knowledge, and knowledge has no tomb. If the Templar fleet truly vanished, leaving behind no sails in the harbour and no treasure in the vaults, perhaps what remains of them lies not on the sea at all, but in stone. Across Europe, their chapels and monasteries still stand, weathered but unbroken, carrying in their walls and carvings whispers of a language older than words. Walk slowly into one of these sanctuaries and let your eyes adjust to the dim light, and you begin to see that the stones themselves seem to speak. Ships carved into columns, their prows forever pointed westward. Octagonal floor plans that echo not European churches but the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, where the Templars first made their home. Inscriptions so subtle that a casual visitor might pass them by, but to those who know, they pulse like breadcrumbs left behind. Consider the octagonal chapels. Unlike the cruciform structures favored by medieval builders, these eight-sided designs were strange, foreign, deliberate. They mirrored the Holy Sepulchre and the Temple Mount, binding every chapel to Jerusalem, the origin point of their order. But some suggest there was more at work here. The octagon, with its perfect symmetry, can be seen as a compass, its geometry pointing in all directions, a hidden map encoded in stone. Could it be that within these chapels, orientation was not just spiritual but navigational, that their very floor plans whispered to sailors and initiates alike the directions of seas yet to be sailed? Then there are the carvings, ships etched into capitals and lintels, sails unfurled, waves lapping beneath their keels. A curious detail emerges. Many of these vessels tilt west, their prows never angled toward the east of the Holy Land, but toward the setting sun. Coincidence, some say. Devotion to pilgrimage routes, others argue. But to those who seek patterns, the message is almost too clear. The Templar story, preserved in stone, pointed not back toward Jerusalem, but outward to the horizon where Europe ended and the unknown began. Coded inscriptions haunt these places too. In Rosslyn Chapel, later associated with Templar traditions, walls are crowded with enigmatic carvings, stars, angels, vines twisted into patterns that hint at hidden codes. In Portugal, within the walls of Tomar, faded frescoes conceal faint outlines of crosses flared at their tips, symbols that only appear when sunlight strikes at certain angles. In France, cloisters bear Latin phrases that seem ordinary until studied more closely, when letters align into acrostics and hidden prayers. Scholars debate endlessly. Are these simply artistic flourishes, or encrypted messages meant for those who knew how to read? Were the Templars leaving behind instructions, hints of what they carried, maps in metaphor waiting to be deciphered centuries later? The debate runs deep. Mainstream historians warn against overreading symbols, cautioning that human eyes see patterns even where none exist. Ships might be ships, octagons might be structural necessities, inscriptions might be devotional rather than conspiratorial. But others argue that the Templars, a brotherhood trained in secrecy, would naturally encode meaning in their architecture. Just as their rituals carried hidden layers, so too might their buildings, silent teachers to future generations who would inherit mysteries too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Pause and imagine yourself in one of these chapels. The air is cool, the light filtered through narrow windows, the stone beneath your hand cold and pitted by centuries. You trace the outline of a carved ship with your fingers, feel the shallow grooves cut by a mason's chisel long ago. Did he carve it as an offering or as a sign? Did he point its prow westward in idle fancy, or did he know something, whispering into eternity with each stroke of his tool? The uncertainty lingers like a soft echo in an empty hall, impossible to silence. Some have gone further still, suggesting that these symbols are not just artistic but instructional, that the chapels themselves were waypoints, encoded like markers on a map stretching from France to Scotland, from Iberia to distant shores. That the octagons were compasses, the ships directional guides, the inscriptions fragments of a code pointing toward where the fleet had gone. The idea is romantic, tantalizing, and endlessly disputed. But in a world where the fleet left no record, what better record could there be than stone, immovable, enduring, and speaking only to those who knew how to listen? Even silence can be a kind of speech. The fact that so many chapels diverged from traditional church design is itself a statement. The Templars were not like other orders, and their buildings reflect that difference. Whether by coincidence or intention, they invite interpretation, they provoke questions, they fuel the sense that something hidden waits behind their stone faces. And perhaps that was the point all along. For if you cannot preserve knowledge openly, you hide it in forms that endure beyond parchment and ink. You hide it in geometry, in alignment, in carvings that survive fire and flood. You hide it in stone, and so the symbols remain. Ships forever sailing west, octagons forever circling Jerusalem yet pointing outward, inscriptions forever whispering to those who strain to hear. Are they coincidences, the idle flourishes of medieval builders? Or are they encrypted breadcrumbs, messages scattered across centuries, guiding seekers toward truths too dangerous to be named? The debate may never end, but in the quiet of these chapels, in the hush of old stone, the symbols continue to breathe, inviting every pilgrim who enters to wonder, to imagine, to listen. For perhaps this is the greatest legacy of the Templars' architecture. Not certainty, but invitation. Not answers, but questions carved so deeply into stone that they cannot be erased. Questions that echo like footsteps across empty halls, urging us always to look west, always to search, always to remember that silence too has a voice. When the Templars fell under the crushing weight of Philip IV's ambition and the Pope's reluctant decree, one might assume their legacy was wiped away. Yet history rarely permits a clean erasure. Power and wealth do not simply vanish. They shift, they flow, they are absorbed by others who know how to claim what has been left behind. And so, into this void stepped not only kings and crowns, but rival orders, the most formidable of which was the Knights Hospitaller. These brothers of St. John had long stood alongside the Templars in the Holy Land, allies in cause, but rivals in influence. Where one order fell, might not the other have stretched out its hand to gather the remnants? Evidence, faint but insistent, suggests that when the Templar fleet disappeared from La Rochelle, not all of it drifted into mystery. Some vessels may have found harbour under banners not their own. Contemporary records show that the Hospitallers, within a generation of the Templar arrests, experienced a sudden expansion of their naval capacity. Where once they had been a modest maritime power, their fleet began to grow swiftly, their harbours filling with ships whose origins were never fully explained. Some of these vessels were larger than the Hospitallers had previously built, resembling Templar cargo ships more than Mediterranean galleys. How did such ships appear so quickly unless they had been inherited, absorbed, or quietly transferred? There are also peculiar references in ledgers and chronicles. In Mediterranean ports, scribes record ships arriving under Hospitaller colours but bearing cargoes, strange and unlisted. Barrels sealed with wax, crates unmarked, deliveries noted only as special or under seal of silence. In one case, a record from Rhodes speaks of cargo beyond the wind, a phrase earlier tied to mysterious arrivals in Portugal. Were these the same shipments, rerouted under new banners, their Templar origins scrubbed away beneath fresh coats of paint? Even rituals may have shifted in curious ways. The Hospitallers, traditionally devoted to care for the sick and protection of pilgrims, began in the decades after 1312 to adopt ceremonies and symbols not previously their own. In some commanderies, crosses were flared in styles more akin to the Templar emblem. In others, prayers once unique to the temple crept quietly into Hospitaller liturgy. Some historians brush these off as natural borrowings between orders with shared missions, but to others they hint at something more deliberate, the absorption of men, memory, and perhaps even secrets from the fallen Templars into their one-time rivals. If this is true, what does it mean for the Vanished Fleet? It raises the possibility that at least some of the ships did not sail to unknown horizons but were folded into the Hospitaller fleet, their sails repainted, their crews sworn anew, their cargoes hidden in plain sight under the mantle of another order. This would not only explain the sudden growth of Hospitaller naval power, but also the survival of Templar traditions that seem to echo faintly within their ranks. It would also mean that the treasure of the temple did not vanish into myth, but continued to circulate under careful watch, disguised beneath the authority of an order loyal to the Pope and therefore above suspicion. But there is a darker possibility. Absorption need not mean preservation, it can also mean usurpation, or even suppression. If the Hospitallers seized Templar ships, they may have done so not to carry forward their legacy, but to erase it, to prevent the dangerous cargo of knowledge and relics from falling into the hands of enemies, or worse, from destabilizing the fragile order of Christendom. In this reading, the Hospitallers were not guardians of the Templar inheritance, but executioners, ensuring that what survived of the temple was absorbed, diluted, and finally dissolved into their own structures until it could no longer be distinguished. The rivalry between the two orders makes this possibility especially poignant. For centuries they had stood side by side, yet always in competition for land, influence, donations, and papal favour. When one fell, the other rose. It is tempting to imagine Hospitaller leaders quietly rejoicing at the destruction of their rivals, then quickly moving to seize their assets, their ports, and perhaps even their ships. To claim the fleet would have been to claim supremacy, to become the undisputed military order of the Church. And indeed, after the Templar dissolution, the Hospitallers stood unrivaled, their star rising as surely as the temples had fallen. Yet whispers endure. Too many unexplained ships, too many strange cargoes, too many sudden shifts in ritual and design. They suggest that the legacy of the temple did not simply evaporate, but was carried forward under other colours. Some argue this was pragmatic survival, that Templar sailors, stripped of their order, joined the Hospitallers to continue their calling, bringing with them their ships, their charts, their traditions. Others see it as calculated appropriation, a rival order cannibalizing the body of its fallen foe while smothering its spirit. Still others dream of a secret alliance, a hidden pact, whereby the Hospitallers safeguarded what the Templars could not, preserving their secrets in shadow until a later age might use them. Imagine now a ship at anchor, its sails once marked with the red cross of the temple. The symbol is scraped away, replaced with the 8-pointed cross of St. John. Its crew, once bound by oaths to the temple, now swear to the hospital. And yet, deep in the hold, beneath layers of tarred canvas, the same sealed chests remain, the same cargo untouched, the same silence unbroken. On the surface, it is a Hospitaller vessel, but in its bones, in its memory, it carries the ghost of the temple still. Thus, the question of rivals and successors lingers without resolution. Did the Hospitallers preserve the fleet, or plunder it? Did they absorb the Templar legacy, or erase it? Was the transfer of ships and symbols a bridge of survival, or a theft of identity? The truth, as always with the Templars, slips into shadow, leaving us only fragments to assemble. And so, as we stand at this crossroads of speculation, one truth emerges above all. The fleet did not vanish into nothingness. It was too large, too prepared, too vital to disappear without a trace. Whether under the black silence of Scotland, the golden rebirth of Portugal, or the repainted banners of the Hospitallers, its legacy endured. Ships that had once borne the temple's cross did not sink in a single night. They sailed on, carrying forward a mystery that remains, like their symbols carved in stone, half erased, but never entirely gone. If the Templar fleet slipped away from La Rochelle, one of the most compelling possibilities is that it did not sail into silence at all. Perhaps it was not hidden in caves or lost to storms, but simply reappeared in plain sight, its sails painted with new symbols, its crews sworn under new contracts, its names re-inked into ledgers kept by powers accustomed to bending truth. For in the early 14th century, there were two places in Europe with both the capacity and the audacity to absorb such a fleet without leaving a ripple: Venice and Genoa, the mighty merchant republics of the Mediterranean. Venice was a master of reinvention. Its wealth came not only from trade, but from its unmatched ability to manipulate paper, ink, and identity. Ships changed names as easily as merchants changed robes. Registries could be amended overnight, erased, rewritten, and then validated by the Republic's seal as though they had always been true. If a fleet sought to disappear, there was no better place than the Venetian docks, where anonymity could be purchased as surely as spices or silk. Imagine Templar ships gliding into the lagoon beneath moonlight, their crosses concealed, their cargo sealed tight, their masters carrying purses heavy with coin. By dawn, the names in the logbooks would be different, their flags replaced with Venetian banners, their crews folded into the great machine of maritime trade. What had been the Templar's fleet one night would be a Venetian convoy the next, indistinguishable among the thousands of ships plying the seas under St. Mark's Lion. Genoa, too, offers a tantalizing possibility. Unlike Venice, whose power lay in polished order and calculated reinvention, Genoa thrived on secrecy, betrayal, and backroom bargains. Its reputation was that of a republic always whispering in corners, always shifting loyalties, always striking deals in shadows. If the Templars needed a place to offload sensitive cargo or disguise their ships under new names, Genoa would have been eager to oblige, for a price. Records hint at sudden influxes of vessels in Genoese harbours during the years following 1307, vessels whose origins are never clearly explained, whose registries appear oddly abbreviated or altered. In such a world, a Templar fleet could vanish not by sinking into mystery, but by becoming part of the Genoese fabric hidden beneath layers of contract and conspiracy. Both republics were expert at laundering not only goods but identities. Grain stolen from one port might reappear in another as a new consignment. Spices smuggled past customs could be repackaged, stamped, and sold under entirely new provenance. Why not ships? A vessel with its keel beams carved in the Templar tradition could, with fresh paint and forged documents, pass as Venetian or Genoese in a matter of days. And once folded into the fleets of these republics, the ships would be invisible, protected by the sheer mass of maritime traffic and the republic's fierce defense of their autonomy. No king's men could seize them without risking open conflict with Venice or Genoa, powers too valuable and too volatile to provoke lightly. Consider the financial machinery of Venice, which in many ways mirrored the Templars' own system. Letters of credit, banking innovations, partnerships spread across continents all thrived in Venice, much as they once had under the Temple's shield. To lose their fleet into Venetian hands might not even have felt like a loss at all, but a continuation under another guise. And in Genoa, where secret treaties and sudden betrayals were as common as tides, the Templars' clandestine traditions would have found a natural echo. Their methods of coded letters, hidden alliances, and veiled contracts were already second nature to Genoese merchants. It would not be difficult to imagine the fleet slipping seamlessly into that culture, its identity dissolved, but its essence preserved. What makes this theory compelling is not only the Republic's capabilities, but their incentives. For Venice and Genoa, absorbing the Templar fleet would have been a prize beyond measure. Not merely ships and cargo, but sailors disciplined in logistics, commanders trained in secrecy, and perhaps most dangerously of all, whatever knowledge or charts the Templars carried with them. In the hands of merchant republics whose wealth depended on maritime dominance, such assets would have been irresistible. Imagine Venetian cartographers quietly copying star charts unknown to their peers, or Genoese captains steering routes whispered only by cloaked men from France. Such advantages would not only enrich the republics but cement their dominance for decades, and yet secrecy would be vital. To openly acknowledge harboring the Templar fleet would invite papal wrath, French anger, and the suspicion of rival powers. The genius of Venice and Genoa lay in their ability to hide truth behind layers of ambiguity. Ships would not vanish, they would simply be renamed. Crews would not disappear. They would quietly sign new contracts. Cargo would not be lost. It would be sold under new seals, its origins blurred beyond recognition. In this way, the Templar fleet could be hidden not in distant caves or legendary islands, but in the busiest ports of the known world, concealed in plain sight beneath the banners of the Lion or the Cross of St. George. The theory, of course, remains speculative. No ledger explicitly records Templar ships absorbed. No Venetian decree admits to laundering an outlaw fleet into its service. And yet, the silence itself is suggestive. For if such an absorption occurred, it would have been designed precisely to leave no trace, no record, nothing but the faintest shadows in maritime archives and the suspiciously sudden swelling of fleets in the early 14th century. Perhaps that is why this possibility feels so plausible, because Venice and Genoa were masters of erasure, turning history into commerce, turning mystery into profit. So we ask again, could the Templar fleet have survived, not by hiding in the wilderness, but by disappearing into the crowd, its sails blending into the endless procession of merchant convoys? Could the ships that once bore the Red Cross have become indistinguishable among thousands, their legacy hidden in the ledgers of Venice or the conspiracies of Genoa? If so, then the fleet is not lost at all. It is simply unrecognized, its story buried beneath names rewritten, its memory blurred into the roar of commerce that still echoes through those harbors today. And perhaps that is the most Templar fate of all, not to vanish in fire or wreckage, but to survive in silence, their fleet sailing still, unseen, beneath flags that were never truly theirs. When history runs out of parchment and ink, legend begins to write in whispers. And so, with the Vanished Templar Fleet, we do not only find records of ships provisioning or ledgers gone strangely silent, we find stories, folk tales scattered along coasts, rumors told by fishermen, and strange sightings recorded in village chronicles. They tell of sails with red crosses appearing where none should be, of ghostly fleets gliding through mist, of ships that seem to belong not to the present but to some lost and restless past. These are the ghost ships of Templar lore, drifting not only across seas but across centuries. In Brittany, long after the fall of the Templars, there were whispers of vessels seen far offshore, their sails faintly marked with crimson symbols that glowed under moonlight. Fishermen swore they saw them in the grey dawn, crews silent, eyes shadowed, vanishing into fog before pursuit was possible. Some said they appeared on the eve of war, warning of bloodshed to come. Others believed they arrived during times of famine, omens of hunger and loss. Was it merely imagination, the mind conjuring spectres from memory and fear? Or could it have been echoes of ships still sailing in secrecy, their presence so uncanny that they became myth? In Galicia, at the western edge of Spain, tales endure of cloaked men landing at night, their ships painted with crosses that the villagers did not recognize but that the elders said carried a memory older than their own time. They came ashore, traded coins of foreign mint, then vanished again into the Atlantic before sunrise. Local fishermen claimed that on stormy nights, when waves crashed too high and the wind screamed too loud, they could see ghostly sails cutting through the tempest, moving against the storm, impossibly steady, as though guided by a force greater than wind and tide. Folklore, perhaps, yet the persistence of these tales across generations suggests something deeper than idle fancy. Even across the ocean in Newfoundland, stories echo strangely similar. Among local oral traditions, there are mentions of pale men who came by ship long before Columbus, bearing signs and symbols unknown to the native people. Some stories speak of kindness, of trade and gifts left behind. Others hint at secrecy, men who moved inland and were never seen again. Centuries later, European settlers recorded ghost stories of ships with red crosses appearing on the horizon only to vanish when approached, leaving no wreckage, no trace, nothing but the chill of wonder in the air. Could these have been memories of Norse voyages misremembered, or were they faint echoes of something else, of ships that fled La Rochelle and never stopped sailing? The motif of the ghost ship is ancient and universal. Sailors, forever at the mercy of sea and sky, have long woven tales of phantom vessels appearing in mist. But the detail of the Red Cross, so specific, so persistent, makes the Templar versions difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Why this symbol? Why this particular image tied to ships seen centuries after the Order's destruction? Unless perhaps some memory endured, carried not by ink on parchment but by word of mouth, echoing through time as fishermen told their sons, and their sons told theirs. Skeptics argue that such legends are nothing more than folklore born of fear. In times of crisis, people look for omens, for symbols that explain the inexplicable. A famine comes and ghostly ships are seen as heralds of doom. A war breaks out, and red crosses on sails are remembered as warnings from beyond. Folklore fills the gaps that history leaves open, soothing uncertainty with stories that make the chaos of life seem patterned, fated, explained. Perhaps these ghost ships are no more than that, fear given form upon the sea. Yet others whisper that folklore is not mere invention, but the shadow of truth carried forward. A story need not be precise to be real. A ship need not be fully seen to have sailed. If the Templar fleet did indeed scatter, some to Scotland, some to Portugal, some perhaps across the Atlantic, might not a few vessels have lingered on the margins of Europe, sailing in secrecy, preserving their silence but unable to erase their sails from the eyes of coastal witnesses? Even if only fragments of the fleet survived, their appearance would be enough to seed centuries of rumour, enough to echo as ghost ships across time. And so the debate persists. Are these tales merely the sea's habit of inspiring the uncanny, or are they distant reflections of a fleet that never wholly vanished, only transformed, only disguised? Ghost ships are by nature liminal. They hover between life and death, between truth and imagination, between the known and the unknown. So too does the Templar fleet, suspended forever in history's fog, too present to be forgotten, too absent to be proven. Imagine standing on a cliff at dusk, the wind sharp with salt, the horizon aflame with the last light of day. Far out, you glimpse a sail, white canvas marked with a cross that glows faintly in the fading sun. You blink, and it is gone. Did you truly see it? Was it a trick of light, or was it a shadow from the past? A reminder that some stories do not die, they only drift, waiting to be seen again. That is the power of these ghostly legends, not to prove, not to disprove, but to keep alive the question, to keep the mystery breathing with each retelling. The ghost ships of Templar lore may be no more than stories, or they may be the last reflections of a fleet that chose silence over surrender, secrecy over extinction, survival over capture. Whether folklore, fear, or echoes of sails that still cut across forgotten waters, their presence haunts us still, urging us to listen to the sea's whispers and to remember that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to linger, like sails fading into mist, like voices carried by waves, like the eternal red cross glowing faintly in memory's fog. And so we arrive at the end of our journey, standing not at a final answer, but at the threshold of a lasting mystery. We began with the haunting image of an entire fleet, crewed, provisioned, and ready, vanishing from La Rochelle on that fateful October night in 1307. From that moment of disappearance, history falls silent, leaving only scattered fragments, rumours, and legends. Yet when we gather the threads, a pattern begins to emerge, subtle but unmistakable. It suggests that what happened to the Templar fleet was not a simple vanishing into myth, but a transformation into something new, something enduring, something too resilient to be extinguished by king or pope. The silence in the records is the first and loudest clue. Maritime registries that once meticulously tracked ships suddenly grow vague and incomplete in the years following the arrests. Entire entries are missing, voyages go unrecorded, and vessels appear under suspiciously altered names. This void in documentation is not accidental, it is deliberate, as though something were being concealed, erased, or hidden in plain sight. In history, silence is rarely emptiness. It is often the loudest testimony of all. Then there are the breadcrumbs scattered across Europe and beyond. A coastal ledger in Scotland recording stone tablets of strange origin. Portuguese records noting ships that arrived from beyond the wind. Genoese and Venetian registries swelling with vessels of uncertain provenance. Frescoes painted over, inscriptions half buried, ships carved into chapel walls forever pointing west. Each clue alone may be explained away as coincidence, as error, as mere curiosity. Yet together they weave a web too intricate to dismiss. These are not random fragments, they are pieces of a tapestry that points to movement, continuity, survival. Suspicious continuities deepen the case. The sudden expansion of hospitaller fleets after 1312, the uncanny preparedness of Portugal for its age of discovery, the echo of Templar ritual within successor orders, the peculiar alignment of architecture and symbols across Europe, all these suggest that the essence of the Templars did not perish in fire. It slipped sideways into other vessels, other names, other guises. Just as water shifts form but never ceases to flow, so too did the Templar fleet. Not gone, not lost, but altered, disguised, reborn in ways subtle enough to elude destruction, yet strong enough to endure centuries. This is the heart of the matter. The Templar fleet did not vanish, it transformed. To imagine it slipping beneath the waves, burned or seized, is to underestimate the discipline, secrecy, and foresight of the order. These men were logisticians, strategists, navigators. They prepared, they planned, they preserved. When their enemies struck, they were already moving, already scattering, already protecting what mattered most. Whether that was gold, relics, or knowledge, it was carried away, not destroyed. And perhaps it is the idea of knowledge that lingers strongest. The treasure beyond gold, the maps that hinted at western lands, the scrolls whispered to contain truths too dangerous for Rome. These may well have been the true cargo of the fleet, guarded more fiercely than any coin. If so, then the fleet's disappearance was never about escape, it was about preservation. It was about carrying something forward, beyond the reach of those who would have silenced it. And in that light, the transformation of the fleet becomes less a retreat and more a mission fulfilled. Legends of ghost ships in Brittany, Galicia, and Newfoundland remind us that stories carry truths even when details blur. The ships may not sail still upon the seas, but they sail in memory, in whispers, in the enduring sense that something was carried away and never truly lost. The Templar cross glows faintly still, etched into stone, painted beneath plaster, remembered in ritual, haunting the edges of our histories. This persistence itself is evidence of transformation, of survival. For if the fleet had been destroyed utterly, the silence would have been total. Instead, we find echoes everywhere, like footprints half buried in sand, refusing to vanish. So let us step back and reflect. The Templars, betrayed by kings and condemned by popes, did not meet their end in chains or fire alone. Their ships departed, and with them sailed wealth, knowledge, and mystery. They scattered to Scotland, to Portugal, to merchant republics, perhaps even to the edges of the New World. In each place they adapted, reshaped, and continued. The fleet was not destroyed, it departed. It did not vanish, it transformed. And that transformation was its true legacy. For in the end, what matters most is not whether we can prove every ledger, decipher every inscription, or unearth every artifact. What matters is the enduring power of the mystery itself. The Templars remind us that history is never complete, that silence can be as telling as speech, that what is hidden is often more powerful than what is revealed. Their fleet, whether in reality or in legend, continues to sail not only across seas but across our imagination, urging us to question, to wonder, to seek. And perhaps that was the mission all along, not to preserve only wealth or relics, but to preserve mystery itself, to ensure that their story would echo across centuries, refusing to be silenced. Because mystery is power, it compels us to look deeper, to search further, to keep alive the restless spirit of discovery that no decree can extinguish. So let us end with this reflection, a truth whispered through time. The fleet was not destroyed. It departed, carrying with it wealth, knowledge, and mystery, and perhaps that was its true mission all along.